The actions of Luigi Mangione has created what I call a tragic martyr, a kind of figure within the society that some people look to as a source of inspiration and a source of strength. But in all reality, when you look beyond the romantic veneer plastered upon their image, you see not only a tragic case, you see something that is substantively harmful to society and something that reflects the worst impulses within human nature, and yet a lot of people seem to be catching on and following along with this sort of tragic figure that is emerging in the form of Luigi Mangione, and they're doing so amid a critique of the healthcare system. There's been a lot of analysis and there's been a lot of commentary about this particular issue ever since the tragic murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, who was shot in the back allegedly by Mangione. There is a wide variety of things that must be discussed and must be talked about. If we want to capture the Mangione phenomenon and define it in a way that will help us avoid this kind of nihilism and avoid this kind of callous thinking when it comes to our fellow human beings, and also address some of the very real problems that are happening within our society. So in this video, we'll be discussing the philosophy behind the sort of Mangione phenomena, as I call it, in the murder of CEO Brian Thompson. And I'll be explaining the ideological currents that I believe are currently influencing the apologism for Mangione and how to respond to them and how to trace back their origins throughout history to understand where they come from and how they're formulated. But before we get into that, my friends, hope all of you are doing well. I'm Christian Watt. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy political and social commentary with a philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe. Do whatever you can, my friends, to ensure we can get our message out there. Even if you disagree with me, we are almost at 20,000 subscribers. I know I say that all the time, but I'm so excited. I'm not sure if we'll hit it by the end of the year, but who knows? Anything can happen. But I think that there's a need for a much deeper conversation to be had about so many of the different things that happen in our society today. I believe our discourse is like a tree that has not been watered. And you can starve a tree out without water for a little bit of time, and it'll be fine. But if the tree goes without water for weeks, or days, weeks, or even months, it'll begin to decay, fall apart, and die. And I think that our minds have accepted the dead state we're in right now within our culture, within our discourse, and I think that's a very bad thing. We ought to fight that. We ought to strive to see the light of truth so that it might penetrate every aspect of our life, every aspect of our thinking, and so that we might be vessels for higher ideas. And so if that interests you, then please like, share, comment, subscribe. Now please enjoy the video. So, Luigi Mangione. Now, he has inspired a kind of fervor within the culture that I hate to see, but I'm not necessarily surprised about. He has inspired a kind of fervor within the culture, I think, for a few reasons. Number one, because of his physical appearance. Now, I hate to say this, I hate to sound cynical, but there are some minds that are captured by aesthetics and cannot see beyond that. We're actually going to talk about where that comes from in a moment as well, because that's actually a deep phenomenon too. But then there are other people that are inspired by him, despite his alleged murderous actions, not necessarily due to his looks, but because of what they believe he represents towards a system that they believe is harming and exploiting people. And for these two reasons, you have seen an outpouring of support for Luigi Mangione. You've seen, for example, I saw a poll where 40% plus of young people, of Gen Z, my generation, said they actually are okay with his actions. You've seen, for example, copycats or alleged copycats. There was a individual in a company outside of Michigan, outside of Grand Rapids, I believe, who stabbed the CEO of his company. There was an individual who called into Blue Cross and Blue Shield and threatened them, and uses the catchphrase that Luigi Mangione allegedly wrote upon the shell casings that were found at the scene of Brian Thompson's death: deny, defend, depose. We'll talk about that in a moment as well. It's actually a very coded and very philosophically interesting phrase as well. We've seen people go out into the streets in New York and wear costumes that look like the costume Mangione was wearing when he allegedly committed the crime. We've seen people go out with big banners that say deny, defend, depose, who are supporting them. We've seen people go out with Luigi hats like Mario supporting it. We've seen so many different kinds of expressions of support. We've even seen a kind of messianism. a kind of deification of Luigi as some kind of saint, some kind of paragon of virtue, some kind of Robin Hood type figure for doing what he did, as you see in this picture here. Well, I actually want to address this point quickly as well. First, the messianism or the deification, because this kind of goes into the problem of romanticism, which we'll address in a second. But the problem with Robin Hood, there's been a lot of Robin Hood parallels. The problem with Robin Hood is actually the same problem with Mangione. It's that Robin Hood took unethical means to achieve ends that were deemed to be good for a certain kind of people. So already in the tale of Robin Hood, this man that supposedly goes to the elites and steals from them and then gives back what was supposedly taken from the people, already in the example of Robin Hood, we see two critical flaws that we as moral people, we as thinking people should obviously avoid. Number one, we see the glorification of violence as a means of settling or correcting wrongs. Violence in and of itself is a neutral force, but it is a force that is like fire. It is a force that when it is contained can perhaps lead towards conditions that create and that lay down the preconditions for creation and growth, as a forest fire would do. But when it is not contained, or when it is used recklessly, it can destroy and annihilate that which was. It can destroy the proper ordering of things. And that's what Robin Hood, from a social level, does. Trying to justify violence against people because of some status they have destroys the proper ordering of things. It eliminates goodwill as a force, and it does so many other caustic things that lead to a worse kind of society and a worse kind of apprehension of human values. But also, not only does it valorize unethical behavior for some kind of good end, it assumes that morality is concerned about ends as opposed to be concerned about, number one, intentions, and number one, means, right? So intentions, whenever we do an action, it is guided by some kind of intention, even if it's a reflexive action. For example, if someone touches you and you don't know they're there, well, that reflexive action is guided by the intention of self-preservation that is just embedded into your human being. That when someone touches you, you don't know who they are, like, whoa, what's going on? Because you're trying to see, okay, this is an immediate threat to me. You're trying to assess the situation. Well, intentions can be neutral, or they can be immoral or moral. And when your intentions are immoral and your means are also immoral, that does not create a moral outcome, no matter how much. Look at the laws of logic, for example. An incorrect premise and an incorrect premise do not lead to a correct conclusion. Your conclusion may be correct, but not because of the premises, but because in spite of the premises. So that's why I think the whole absurdity of Robin Hood, and it shouldn't even be used as an allegory or a myth. And we need to look really deeply into the tyranny of symbols that have taken over our culture. That's a different story, different day. But there are several things going on with the Mangione phenomenon that I think warrant addressing. I think that the immense outpouring of support for him and the hatred towards Brian Thompson, people that did not know him, people who are not looking at him as a human, comes from what I call the structural view of man. If you do not understand this, you will not understand the situation, and you will also not understand how a lot of people, especially a lot of people on the left or in far parts of the right, view individuals in the context of institutions and in society. So the structural view of man is actually this very pernicious idea that I think has been embedded into American politics, coming over from Europe for over 120 plus years. I believe that the progressive era actually was very instrumental in pushing it forth into our consciousness, but it is actually a distinctly anti-American idea. Because the structural view of man starts with the premise that human beings are defined and ordered. So defined as people, that's one component, and then ordered in their actions, a second component, by the institutions, by the groups, or by the society they belong to. And it eliminates any variation, it eliminates any kind of moral responsibility, and it eliminates any role that we have in shaping our destinies. So we have to start with a few premises before I get more into this idea. So man is both a political and a social animal. But man is at first an animal capable of higher ideas, capable of understanding the world through reason and formulating moral judgment with his cognitive powers. And conscience is the chief sort of governing principle of reason and the chief governing principle of our moral powers. Conscience is that thing that can inform us within our hearts if something is wrong, something is right. It's that thing that can keep our actions well ordered to what is proper. It's not the only thing, of course. I'm not a sentimentalist. It's not the only thing, but it is a primary thing. It's a primary force moving us towards moral good. The view that man is owned or defined by their surroundings, which is what the structural view of man poses, was a prominent feature of old world thinking that America wantonly rejected. It was rejected at the founding and christening of American civilization because the bases of that civilization were the exact opposite of this structural view of man, and this brought forth what I call the New World mindset. Now, institutions do play a big role in shaping the trajectory of society and shaping even our experiences within society. But they were no longer seen at the christening of the American founding as these sort of deterministic forces who decide the fate of man from cradle to the grave. This is where individualism came in. Individualism said that social reductionism, seeing man solely as an extension of the community, as opposed to seeing man as seeing the community as one element in man's overall formation, because there are other elements as well, or atomism, which was recognized as the antecedent to human flourishing and self-determination. Individualism rejected both of those ideas. And that's what brought forth, I see, a new social philosophy of man in American civilization. The fundamental premises, however, of leftism suggest a very different view of man than that what was christened by the American founding in many of its proponents. Not all of its proponents, but many of its proponents. Man is seen as a sort of malleable creature who is at first defined by his social status or his identity. This does not stop at the elementary considerations of proletariat or bourgeoisie, black or white, gay or straight. The dichotomies are common because they are mundane. There is little fresh insight to gain from the human experience by seeing it within these compartmentalized boxes. So for many ideologies on the left, especially progressivism and socialism, obtaining social consciousness is the ultimate end of a man's existence. This was the theory proposed by John Dewey, who believed that education should be for the purpose of giving man social consciousness and ignoring general principles that would help him actually succeed in life, regardless of the condition of the society. The goal of education for Dewey, and for those that came after him in large part, was to render pupils favorable in the eyes of the community with little regard to the health or culture of the mind and their relationship to ultimate truths. So when you see people in this light, you think that their status, the approval of their community, their institutions are what actually makes them, as opposed to other things that are more unique to them in their own experiences, it is then even more easier to advance a perverse account of moral responsibility that provides cover for heinous actions such as the murder of Brian Thompson. I want all of you to stop. I may have laid a lot on you just then, and that's okay, because we're up against a civilizational crisis. And many of you can probably tell I'm passionate about this because it breaks my heart that a family is now without a father, almost at Christmas time, a wife, kids, all because of the position he occupied in a hierarchy, in an institution, which in the eyes of Mangione and in millions of others who are celebrating his actions, are the essence of him. We've think about society from a point of power structures. We have lost the essence of what it means to be human, because we consider people solely in that light. And that doesn't tell you anything about them, except about certain actions they may have taken in life that put them in certain positions. But actions, just like a river, have headwaters. And those headwaters are sometimes very important and very interesting to glean, because by looking at a river's headwaters, you can see the majesty of the river's existence. Looking at that small stream or creek that then comes into this massive, wide, winding thing that goes into so many different directions. That's very much how life is if you see it metaphorically. But think about this. Most of the apologia for Mangione's actions centers around the idea that he was raising awareness about the healthcare system and its abuses. Many celebrated Mangione's actions as a referendum on the system and considered Thompson's social existence only as someone who was positioned in that structural hierarchy and not as someone who was a living human being with desires, ambitions, a family, free will, creative potential, flaws and merits, hopes, fears, character, internal conflicts, personal love, platonic love, reason, intelligence, whatever. All those things that I just mentioned make up what it means to be a human being. Those things and more, not just those things, but those things and more. But Thompson is not considered within that realm because of the structural view of man. Everything that makes Thompson not just a human, but an individual, a sojourner in existence, is crushed beneath the weight of the structure of the insurance industry. This is the structural view of man. Man is a product of his institutions or of one aspect of his life relating to broader society and can be seen in no other light. This is not what is called collectivism by some people. This is actually much worse because at least collectivism erases your individual identity in all of its forms and subsumes you into some amorphous idea where no one recognizes you. But this is something much worse. It's an abstract view. It's an abstraction without justification, taking a living person and then making them represent a single idea, a disembodied idea, one that is detached from the realities of their life, and therefore also detached from the moral considerations of them being a human being, and therefore also detached from the due empathy and sympathy that we as human beings owe each other. You take that, you detach it, you can easily dehumanize them, or unhumanize them rather, and pose forth an agenda or a thing that would, under any other context, under the principles I just mentioned, would be considered completely and utterly immoral. And then you impose that idea upon them to justify a malevolent action. When the haze of abstraction clears, the structure remains unbroken. The insurance industry is not being touched by this. The healthcare industry is not being touched by this. They are being largely unbroken. And the problem persists. And the only casualty is our social conscience and our civility. So if there's any lesson that I want to bring out of this, is that you must all reject the structural view of man. This is a view that is similar but not exact to what Marx had. This is a view that is similar but not exact to what Stalin had and to what many others that are in that milieu of totalitarian mind had. We must reject it. But there's also another ideological current that is behind the Mangione phenomenon. And that is the romantic mind. And this, I think, speaks forth the dangers of the romantic mind. So, romanticism is something that is both treated informally and formally. Some people may say, well, you are romanticizing that thing. And then when they say that kind of stuff, they mean it very informally. You're just thinking about it in a way that is above and beyond, that removes all imperfections. But when you understand that the roots of that particular saying, and you understand its formal origins, the meaning and the dangers of romanticism become far more revealed to you than if you just understand it informally. Formal and informal meanings, those are two very different categories. One of which actually prepares you to deal with the word, the other of which simply prepares you to use the word. A lot of you use words that you don't actually know how to deal with. Let that sit with you for a moment. And if you're not in that category, good for you. But that's just something that I've noticed in society today. So, romanticism, I think, is actually a dangerous phenomenon. And it reflects why there are pictures of Mangione as a saint. It reflects why there are people saying they want to have sex with him. It reflects why there are people trying to dress up like him, buying up jackets from stores that look similar to the one he had. It reflects why deny, defend, depose, which is simply a recitation of the structural views ethos, which justifies violence against people simply for the social hierarchy. It reflects why that is falling out of the mouths of many people. It's because they are seeing this entire thing in a way that is not at all jilling to reality, in a way that is not at all engaging other parts of their mind. It's only engaging their imagination. Their imagination is captured by an abstract idea. Allow me to explain a little bit further. So, Romanticism, or the Romantic mind, Romanticism is actually a very broad intellectual movement that came after the Enlightenment. And it was headed up by figures like Wordsworth and Coleridge and William Blake and all these other kinds of poets who posited, amongst many other things, that intuition and subjectivism and personal experience should be the guiding principles of life, and these guiding principles should be a route into imagination and reason and a careful look at things and empiricism and evidence and the more sort of systematic way of dealing with the world were not only should they be discarded, they were fundamentally enemies to human creativity, to human growth, to human passion. So Romanticism kind of created this world where if you don't see everything through the lenses of rose-colored glasses, if you don't see everything through the lenses of your own subjective experience, if you go beyond what William Blake called the inner world, you are somehow doing a disservice to yourself in the worst way possible. There's evidence of this. For example, William Blake, he urged people in his poem, Jerusalem, the emanation of the great Albion, that you must create your own system. He says, and I quote, "I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's. I will not reason and compare. My business is to create." So he's all about using your mind to create your own perception of things, to create your own version of things, and not to use your reason to actually suss out if those things have any merits, because it doesn't matter, because the ultimate standard against which you're posing your ideas is not reason, it's your imagination. So then you have other people, like for example, like Coleridge and Wordsworth. I've read Wordsworth more than I have read Coleridge, but there's a kind of theme within them that says imagination and memory are both two very important things for us to hold on to, and to hold on to in how we shape our experiences within the world. So, for example, Coleridge, he kind of demonstrated the kind of pitfalls of this idea that imagination and creativity are everything. When he tried to imagine how his friends would feel on a particular journey because he had some experience, some knowledge of the place they were going. And he did this in The Lime Tree Bower, My Prison, where he said, for example, "They may view the sea with some fair bark, perhaps whose sails light up the slip of smooth clear blue betwixt two isles of purple shadow." Now again, he was describing his experience with those particular places, but he projected his experience onto his friends. This is a feature, not a bug, of the romantic mind. It leads to some kind of, I think, prideful estimation of life, some kind of prideful estimation of how people experience things, simply because you believe that your standard of knowledge is the ultimate standard of knowledge. So the romantic mind is defined by a few characteristics. Number one, it's defined by putting intuitionism, how you feel about certain things, or your sort of gut feeling, over reason. It's defined by putting subjectivism over the external world. That means not only how you feel about things, but how you decide things are how they are, regardless of what the world around you tells, which is the exact opposite of the idea of direction fit in philosophy, that your belief should fit reality. This is actually making reality fit your beliefs. This is what delusional people do, but sometimes delusions are elevated and they're celebrated as some kind of grand thing that ultimately makes you what you are. Look at how the gender identity thing works. And then there's the imagination as the ultimate value. So what you can imagine, as Blake said, what you can create with your inner world, with your system, is what you should pursue, and that should be the main thing. The problem is, all this is made vulnerable when it comes up against concrete facts. No amount of imagination can take you beyond your own mediocrity. If you are doing things that are not going to advance your life, and they're objectively not going to advance your life, imagination can't dream your way out of that. Imagination can also be a tool to imprison you to a kind of complacency where you do not want to flourish, or where you are ignorant of broader moral laws and principles that should govern your life, or you are ignorant of the feelings or the desires, or ignorant of the conditions of your fellow man, which then therefore impairs your social growth, so on and so forth. There are so many reasons why Romanticism, when it's taken beyond a literary sense, can be dangerous. Mangione's case perfectly reflects this. It reflects this because Mangione, as this figure, despite the fact that his case is quite tragic, is being romanticized beyond what is appropriate. He's being seen as this force, this paragon of good, this sort of man who did nothing wrong because he somehow was trying to rectify some kind of evil. But if you look at his life, beyond the romantic idea, beyond the allowing your intuition to guide your perception of him, beyond allowing your subjective feelings to guide your perception of him. You look at his life. He was an Ivy League graduate. This was obviously an intelligent person. You saw some of the posts on social media. This was obviously somebody who came from a very well-off family, which is allegedly funding his legal fund. This is obviously somebody who engaged deeply with certain issues that most people don't engage deeply with. This is obviously somebody that had the skills and the character, it seemed, up until he did this, to live a purpose-filled life, to live a meaning-driven existence, and to perhaps positively impact the world. And yet, despite every advantage he had, the wealth, the aesthetics, the engagement to certain ideas, the intelligence, all of it goes downhill because he decided to unlawfully, unjustly take the life of somebody else. Only to the romantic mind can this be seen as desirable, or can this be seen as something to aspire to. Because you can eliminate all those other things and then enhance the things that you think, not things that are, that you think actually belong to the figure of the person you're constructing. This is where idolatry comes into play. Because the idea of idolatry is never to exalt. You don't exalt something, you don't idolize something that you do not see some overarching, higher, aspirational thing within. Because if you were to idolize something, that means that you believe there's something that thing has that you do not have. If this is a quality that you yourself do not possess, or that you see as something you want to eventually have. It's one of the reasons why if you look at the story of the Bible, the golden calf was praised when Moses went up to the mountain, because the golden calf possessed, at least the children of God who were in that situation believed it possessed, some kind of comfort and some kind of security that they did not believe they were getting from the actual God in that particular story. Well, it's the same kind of thing, I think. I think the idolatry is the same kind of thing. There are a lot of folks who had bad experiences with the healthcare system and are then therefore using Mangione as a sort of proxy for their viewpoints without actually realizing just how much of a villain he is, and they're idolizing him. And idolatry, the antecedent to idolatry is what? It's what? It's romanticism. We have a problem with, yes, the structural view of man, which is much more, I think, materialistic than anything else. But then the idealistic, the romantic view of man, which reduces people to the qualities that we construct and that we admire and we don't have, throws it up in the ether, and then deals with them on that level without actually grappling with the nastiness, grappling with the tough stuff, grappling with the rough edges of life. You can't practically complete anything. You can't practically do anything because you don't understand definitions within their proper context. And this leads to the problem of heroism. A lot of people believe Luigi Mangione is a hero. Now, if we've established that there is a bad worldview guiding the praise of him, we've established that there is a idealistic worldview enhancing his image, and we've established that this idealism leads to idolatry, which then leads us to an improper understanding of our own experiences as human beings, then we can easily see where the problem with the heroism idea comes into play. Someone that has a heroic trait, whether you look at old mythology, whether it be Achilles, whether it be Odysseus in the Odyssey, these are traits that are within the realm of human possibility. We can do them. But they are things that we do that bring honor to ourselves, that bring, I think, a sense of accomplishment to ourselves, and that bring inspiration to others within moral constraints. So when Odysseus goes back and he fights off the suitors that are trying to unjustly take his seat of power and trying to unjustly go against his wife or manipulate his wife, When Odysseus goes against the sirens in the sea, when Odysseus manages to escape the Cyclops that had captured him and that had wanted to destroy him by creative use of words, I am nobody, for example, those of you that read the Odyssey will know what I'm talking about. These are things that are extraordinary, but they're extraordinary in a way that allows us to be more opened up to the possibilities of doing things in our own life and the possibilities of virtue. So in order for an act to be heroic, an act must first be virtuous, and that virtue must communicate something to the human experience. Well, murder is actually a rather banal act. Heroism is not banal. I should probably add that in as well. Heroism is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who, standing on his faith, goes against an entire Nazi regime and risks his life and eventually ends up dying for it. That's heroism. That's something you don't see every day. Murder is a rather common occurrence. It takes nothing to murder somebody. It especially takes nothing to murder somebody by shooting them in the back like a coward. When your action is so mundane, it's so banal, and it's so destructive to the human experience, especially when universalized, it cannot be heroic because it goes against the basis upon which the heroism would be practiced. Now, if everyone were to do the same thing, or you were to permit morally that to be the standard mode of conduct within society, what happens? Social relationships collapse, society collapses, we lose our sense of justice, we lose our sense of restraint. Restraint is a very important thing for not only outward morality, but inward morality. If you have no restraint, you can be more subject to drugs, alcohol, and the passions that can tyrannize you. So many different things that are so necessary for us as human beings. So it's an unstable principle. Well, if an action destroys the basis upon which it's to be carried out, which would be the human being, like murder, then how can it be heroism when heroism is all about sustaining the human being towards a higher form of life, a higher form of conduct? It can't. It just makes no sense. Most folks understand this intuitively without the philosophical explanation that I've given. But it's important to hear these things because we have to understand the roots of where these things come from to confront them. I think that we're in a very dangerous period in our country right now, my friends. We're in a period where we find it great for our passions. Some people find it great for our passions to govern us. We're in a period where some people find it great to idealize things as opposed to realize them. We're in a period where some people find it great to define people by what they're close to, proximity ethics, as opposed to understanding what people are. We're in a period where a lot of people would rather consign and shackle heroism to the block of banality as opposed to seeing heroism as a manifestation of exceptionalism. We're in a period that I think could very well lead to not just the weakening, it's already weakened, it could very well lead to the collapse of American civilization if these ideas are not tamed by people who understand their problems, who understand their flaws, and who most importantly have the gumption to stand up like I'm standing up, or how you guys have set up in your own life, and say, enough is enough. We will not see people as mere extensions of their communities and their institutions. We will not see people as idealized. We'll see them who they actually are. We will not see heroism as simply repeating an anti-human, antisocial action that does nothing more but destroy the basis upon which it's supposed to allegedly perpetuate. We will not see people as idols, but as actual flawed men. We will not see people, most importantly, as evil for actions they did not commit, but for actions that put them in a particular place, actions that themselves were not particularly evil, i.e. Brian Thompson being a CEO of a company. And we will instead have a more enriched view of man. Man will be defined by how he applies his creative law to the world, how he treats his family, how he treats his friends, how he treats himself, how he treats his society at large, how well he follows principles, how well there's so many different other things you can define man as. How well he uses his reason. And we will let that idea of man stand tall as an ode to the heritage that we have as Americans, and an ode to the kind of thinking that we need to have in order to have a society where moral goodness is prided over blind antagonism and murderous sentiment and nihilism, all of which I think are unfortunately creeping up on us. So my friends, please reject the structural view of man. Please reject the romanticism that we're seeing. Please be wary of idolatry. Please be wary of false notions of heroism. And most importantly, do not allow your passions to overtake your actions, no matter how bad a system may be, no matter how bad a concept may be, because ultimately you will not procure a solution, or the solution that you want at least. You'll only create more problems that will do, I think, perhaps more damage than good towards perfecting or smoothing out some of the flaws that we have in our many different areas of life within this country. My friends, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, do whatever you can to get messages out there. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.